So Adrian Bozman, competition director of CrossFit Games, semifinals is over. It's been and done, and it's complete. Are you happy with, like, from the conception of, say, the tests to seeing them in execution, and like the people that got through, and how you watch the flow and everything? Are you happy with how everything went? If you could, would you go back and change anything now?
Well, a lot of questions in there. The short answer, am I happy with the outcome? Yeah, for sure. I think it was a pretty smooth run this year. You know, big events and this stage of the season is always not without its imperfections, we'll say. You know, like there's always little things that you look at and you're like, yeah, okay, that could have been better or smoother. But overall, I think as a stage of the season to qualify people to the games, it went off really well. Bigger answers, like it's kind of a weird question to me in the sense that I don't think that there's a preconceived outcome other than like we want the events to be good. They need to be well thought out and well-rounded enough that they select the best people to go to the games. You know, the event organizers need to be able to pull them off, meaning, you know, the documents we give them on movement standards and schedule and all of that makes sense enough that they can be transmitted and run by these teams. But, you know, I think sometimes people put a lot of stock into like, well, what did you think about the outcome of that particular event? You're like, well, the athletes are what makes that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I knew it was going to be fast and I knew it was going to be dramatic, but beyond that, you have to play the game and see what happens no matter what's programmed. So yeah, from that kind of broader view, it is kind of a weird question for me. In the short term answer, yes, I do feel like it was a pretty successful stage.
I think it kind of there was moments like the last workout was in hindsight was the perfect last workout, because there was so much drama across pretty much all the semifinals, and it was just the perfect, like, how hard are you willing to go? And then it's like, oh, you went too hard. Like, you needed to pull it back a bit. So it was excellent to watch.
Thanks. And it's interesting because like an event like that, it's always a bit of a crapshoot in the sense that, okay, you know, it's going to be exciting. You know, it's going to be a sprint to the finish. That's kind of known, but you don't know that so many athletes are going to get right to the last section there and then completely fall apart. You don't know that like that is what it's going to come down to over and over and over again until you see it played out. So it's nice when it does work that way, but it's not always the case.
Some commentary or criticism that was leveled. The step down from the box, was that a stimulus thing or a safety thing?
Mostly a safety thing. We've kind of moved away from that in recent years. The jump down, we've just seen so many injuries around that. And, you know, it's one of those things where if you allow the rebound, then basically you're not forcing anybody, but if they want to be competitive, they have to rebound. There's just no way around it. So it's just one of those things that we've seen such a high concentration of injuries in the past that end up really being catastrophic for an athlete that, you know, we just don't want to play with that fire anymore.
What about then the rope, like in the same workout that you could just kind of drop from whatever? Is that not a concern too? No.
Yeah, absolutely is. And we've gone back and forth with that too. You know, we've had years where there's a climb down mark. We've had years where there hasn't been. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword, you know. Sometimes you take the heat for the no reps that are on the line. They're really expensive with that. You know, that's another consideration. When we have that climb down mark, it can be harder to enforce, harder for the athletes. And, you know, the rope climb is one of those things where, yeah, it sucks when there's injuries on it. I mean, we saw one this year. You know, a really high profile one with Rebecca Vittison, which is super unfortunate. But on the other end of that, it's like, you know, I think if we're looking at the numbers, there's not as many incidents with that as we've seen with the box jump down.
There was some criticism of judging too. There was some unbelievably there was some fantastic moments of judging too, though. Like there was some, you know, like Hopper's no rep on the rope, that would have been easy to give. Like Dallin touching his box before his foot like went down. There was some amazing moments. Maybe a bit harsh, but amazing still. With the judging, do you feel like the criticism that you've seen or heard, do you feel like it was fair? Do you feel like it was unbalanced? Like, how are you looking at that in retrospect?
You know, it's funny. I think that the criticism itself, I think, is totally fair. I think like judging in any sport is always going to be scrutinized. That's just sport, and it should be. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be calls that are objectively the right calls. There's going to be calls that are objectively the wrong calls, and we saw both in this competition set. And I think that's one of those things that, like, yeah, absolutely, we should own that when it happens. Like, there's some misses that happen, and they're very public, and yeah, you gotta take that on the chin and move forward. I don't think it's fair to say like, oh, well, the whole sport's falling apart and look at how terrible this is. I think that hyperbole is kind of goofy, because if you look at the consistency across the board, I don't think it's as catastrophic as like some people want to make it out to be, as evidenced by like, yeah, there were a lot of good calls that were being made. And I'll say one thing too about judging that I think people don't take the broad view often, where it's like, look, okay, if you have this objective standard, which on paper you do, and it's completely perfectly enforced, that's great, but that's utopia. And that doesn't exist in the real world when we're talking about flesh and blood people doing real things, out there. And that's true on the athlete side and the judge side. And what I'm trying to say with that is what's really the goal of any competition, if we know that we can't be like 100% objectively accurate, that's not living in reality. What you do want then is the field to be applied as evenly as possible. And so what I mean by that is there'll be some competitions where you're like, man, everybody's super strict in this competition. But if that super strict standard is being applied relatively evenly, well, then it's fair. If you have a loose standard where it's like, man, you're looking at some of the judging, you're like, dude, it's pretty loose out there, but everybody's getting that same kind of loose standard, well, it's pretty fair, even if you don't like the fact that it's loose. And so to me, what you really want to look for in a live competition is this disparity between like, hey, lane 1 is just getting hammered, like this is the strictest judge on earth. And then lane 2 is just somebody who's out to lunch. That's a really bad situation to have in a live comp.
Semifinals next year, do you think it will be the same? Are you envisaging it'll look like the same, that you'll have like vast changes, or do you think it'll be kind of similar to the model that we have now?
In what way? I mean, that's a pretty broad
as in question. Like the actual structure of the competition season, that we'll have like 2 in America, 1 in Europe, 1 and 1 and 1, or do you think that we could revert to a different kind of system, or is that still totally up in the air?
I think it's going to be pretty close to what we're seeing this year. I think we've seen a lot of good momentum over the last couple of years. Like I think 2023, that was last year, right? Jeez.
Yeah.
Got to remind myself sometimes. I think 2023 was like a nice return to form where the programming was set and everybody's doing the same thing. It kind of had that like return to regionals feel. Attendance at some regions was not great. We saw that this year too, right? Like some just smashed it out of the park. Others are a little under what we maybe hoped for. But I think in all regions, we saw some really good steps forward and some momentum that's being gained. And so like capitalizing on that makes a lot of sense in my mind.
The games then, I heard Dave was on with Savan, you were on there too, with the pre-show.
I tried to crash him a little bit because I think they were in that little bathroom there. But
JR's office. Dave was on there, and he was kind of talking about how he was kind of getting inspired being around semifinals, and his juices were flowing a little bit. Is the structure of the games programming the same as it was last year, where it's kind of a team approach with you leading the team, and then Dave is giving input and maybe adding advice, changing things, whatever? Or is he more programming? Because the way he was talking, he was saying like I and me a lot, and I kind of started thinking, oh, is it more him this year?
No, Dave's taken a really active role in programming this year. He's been super fired up and like, hey, I'm happy to collaborate in that regard. You know what I mean? So I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but I'm like, man, I feel like Dave and I are working better together than ever, which is really great because like we've always had a really great working relationship. But this year, it's like, man, it just seems to be easy, for lack of a better term. Like we're bouncing ideas off of each other really well. Like I don't know, it's a nice place to be. So totally happy to see him being fired up. I think that's good for everybody, right? Like when the people in charge of the event are like, dude, I'm so stoked to like get in there and do it. That's when you're going to get really cool things that come out of it. So, yeah.
Where will the swim workout be this year in Texas?
Wait, wasn't that like a carbon copy of the question they asked Dave?
I just thought you might slip up.
yeah. Come on, man. You think I'm a soft target? Give me a break. I know I'm like formerly Canadian, but still.
Yeah. Still. Facundo and Mayhem semifinals recap. Some highlights, some lowlights. Is there anybody you feel stood out? Well, congratulations, first of all. Obviously, you had an awful lot of athletes and teams qualify. Is there anybody that stood out to you as particularly impressive, or maybe took you by surprise by how they performed at semifinals?
Nope. No. I mean, no. We know our athletes and we know how they work, what they were planning to do. I mean, I'm very happy. I wasn't in Knoxville. I was in Brazil, and I'm very happy how Guy managed to take the role he left 2 years ago, the position, back. He gave an extraordinary performance, and I'm very glad about that, because I don't think that people have been fair with him last year.
Is this the best he's been, do you think? Because he looked particularly impressive. Workouts that he normally would have been okay at, he seemed very good at.
I think that this semifinal was very challenging. There was one or another event that would put somebody's weakness on display, and he showed that that at the moment, at least in this format, in this competition, he didn't show any particular weakness. And the field in Brazil is very complicated. There are 3, 4, 5 top athletes, and if you get away from a top 5, 6, 7 spot, you might not be back to get a position on the podium. So he reigned over Copa Azul, and I was very happy about that.
Luke Parker as well, another guy who maybe doesn't get the respect he deserves. He incredibly stacked field in Knoxville, and he managed to get through that. That was particularly impressive too.
Yes.
Cool. No, yes, thanks for coming.
I'm just making it hard for you today. No, yes. I mean, yes, still Knoxville, we knew that it was going to be very challenging. We had, I think, 16 athletes competing for the 11 spots. And Luke, I think that, was clever enough to understand very early into the game what was his best bet to get a spot. And he played that card. He played it very cleverly, and he was also very lucky, because that field, it was impossible really to predict who was going to go to the games, except for 3 or 4 that were granted. So yes, Luke became a very, very fierce competitor, and that was shown during this last weekend.
Tyler Christopher then again, just so narrowly, Seth Stovall as well, another just almost moment. Is how do you console someone when they come that close and miss out?
Well, I think that Tyler didn't put as much expectation and as pressure this year as the former years. He's embracing the coaching side very much, and he's extremely talented for that. So I think that this year he went very relaxed, and would have gotten a spot, it would have been great. He didn't get a spot. Still great. He has more time to dedicate to his new passion, besides being married and so on, but to coaching. So but just wasn't just Seth. It was also Seth, and it was Dre, and it was Tyler. So we had a lot of athletes of Mayhem that were very close to make it to the games, which I understand the frustration is still an achievement, because to be placed top 12, 13, 14 in that region, it means that in whichever other region they would have gone to the games.
2 names then that maybe stood out as perhaps underperforming, as one of there's any kind of reason you could level, of Augustine Riquelme and Jorge Fernandez, 2 guys that I think everybody thought would have been much higher up on the leaderboards that they were in.
Yes, well, it happens, no? It's sometimes everything comes down to one weekend, and maybe that weekend you don't feel like competing, or you have certain affection or pain or something that doesn't allow you to do the things you want to do. And I think that was the case this weekend, but those are the rules of the game, and unluckily you need to abide to those. Agustin was partially sick throughout the whole weekend, and he on the first workout, the run, which I know he tried several times with a complete different time than the one he performed in Copa Azul, and too bad it was not the weekend he was expecting. I still believe he's one of the top athletes in South America, but this weekend he couldn't display what he worked for.
The Canadians then had a good weekend in Knoxville as well. Is this do you think they're on the right trajectory? Maybe Sam can get some kind of redemption at the games that he maybe didn't have the season he wanted last year?
Yes, I think that Sam, we have Sam and Alex. Alex Caron was also, at the verge, was in a very, very complicated position on Sunday. We thought that I thought that the snatch workout was going to be much more hurtful for him. He actually managed to get a rather decent score, and he knew that at the last event he needed to give everything he has, and he did. And Sam too, he didn't have one great season last year, but I talked to him a couple of times lately, and I think he's preparing silently to to show the world his full potential.
What's the plan now then? Will there be like camps? Do you kind of leave everyone do their own thing, stay in touch? Do you bring everyone together early? How do you foresee the next couple of months going?
Well, we have 16 athletes that follow Mayhem that are made it to the games. They are, of course, all invited to come to Cookville during the month of July. All our coaches are going to be there helping our athletes to be prepared. And I think that many of them, they're already seeing how many weeks or how many days can they come, and we are going to do our best to prepare them. But we still also have 9 teams that qualified for the games out of the 30 teams that spots, and they are also invited. So we need to make it realistic that everybody gets the best of us. But we have done that in the past, and we are excited about July in Cookville with our qualifying athletes. And Pedro, you are invited to come.
It's a pretty packed barn by the time the Aussies get in, and everybody else is going to be packed to the rafters.
Yes, but we structure so everybody has enough space to train. There are a lot of things that we can do at Cookville. We don't only have the main gym, but we have the athlete facility. We have the barn. We have 2 barns actually. We have the seniors pond. So we will attribute everybody different spots to train, and I think it's going to be very fun.
Ste Fawcett, HWPO training, the semifinals debrief. We'll start with our most recent week, North America East. Lots of highlights, lots of goodness happening. So we got Brooke Wells is back. Jason Hopper looked, I describe him as free. Like he was kind of risking some things that he might not have risked last year. He was just seemed to be having a bit of fun, which is always a good sign for an athlete. You happy with both their weekends, how they performed and how they came through it and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they both had a different approach to this season, just from the position where they started, where they finished the end of last season, both in different positions. Brooke obviously missing out with, and then having some elbow issues, and then Jay kind of finished the season where he did last year at the game. So, both coming from like a different run into the season, but then at the end of it, both like really happy and really confident with how they performed. You mentioned Jay taking risks there, and I think that just comes off the back of confidence in his own abilities. He's from the time I've spent with him anyway, when we had a training camp into Vermont, and a few times before that, if he's confident, then he's dangerous. And I think that's where, maybe if he's less confident, he's not going to, send that last 10 calories of an echo bike, take a risk on the rope climb, which didn't pay off that time, but then, pushing a 1:32 pace on the last 800 meters of a rower then does pay off. So, when an athlete like Jay's in that kind of mind frame, it's always a great sign. And with Brooke, just great to see one that was smiling and happy and confident on the floor, but more importantly that she's got that ninth appearance at the games and can then have another couple of months, really dialing in some good amount of volume through her shoulders, which has been something that's been monitored quite closely since last season.
Amanda, then, not the outcome she would have wanted. Is it the same injury, the kind of shoulder or back issue that she had, or is it like did semifinals just come a couple of weeks too early, or did something else flare up?
No, I mean she didn't go into semifinals with any particular like new injury or anything. She had tore her labrum during the games last season, which had been an ongoing kind of rehab process from that point. and to the point where we got it just where it needed to be, just pre-quarterfinals. Had a good showing quarterfinals there, but I think, when you're at this level in CrossFit, especially in that region in Northeast, those girls that are making that top, they had 11, didn't they? The top 11 have had a longer time period where they've not had to work around too much. And I think those little things just show when it comes down to the crunch point. I think the main thing that Amanda hadn't been able to do too much of previous, like going into that season, was the snatching. And she said herself that showed on that snatch event, just not being able to hit the volume of those weightlifting sessions. But I think she should be. I think she is, and she should be, proud of how she dealt with the whole season to get herself to that point. I know a lot of athletes would have stopped before they got anywhere near Amanda did. So yeah, hats off to her there.
A few people are mentioning like a rotator cuff issue or something. There's no truth in that, is there?
I mean, she tore her labrum at the games.
Yeah,
confusing that that's the same.
Maybe, yeah.
They're saying the same thing differently. Yeah, it was from doing the pullovers.
Oh yeah, okay.
At games, yeah.
North America West then. Clean sweep if you look at the HWPO YouTube page. So yeah, Cole Grieshaber, he came through. Vellner, Chris Ibarra, like a new name to many people. He's just been following the pro track, is that right?
Yeah, so I caught up properly with Chris. Obviously, Jake and Josh and the rest of the crew met him. I think Jake has actually met him a couple of times previously, and just had a good chat with him last week. And yeah, he said he's just sticking to the pro track. Obviously, he trains out of Hetner's gym with Olivia as well. So they've got a good little training environment going on there, which helps a lot alongside a program. So yeah, it was quite cool to hear that he's just been head down, sticking to the stuff that we've been putting out, and it gets him to, how convincingly qualifying it by the end of the weekend.
I assume that changes now, though. I assume he
So we've changed it this season where for a run into the games, we'll work with the athletes individually at that point to make sure, because we learned from last year that games is just a different beast altogether, and there's a lot more specifics that we need to work around. So yeah, I'll be supporting Chris individually in the next couple of months to get him prepared.
Is that the same with Georgia Pryor then? Is there a more kind of hands-on approach there?
Yeah, but a little bit different with Georgia, because obviously she's got Jake on site, who's a coach as well himself. He knows plenty, really wise guy himself. So me and Jake have had a couple of conversations of how we can use what we've got and get Georgia the best she needs. Send her some specific progressions that she needs to follow for her erg work and her strength. And me and Jake will go back and forth weekly to then Jake, do the day-to-day with Georgia. So that should work.
Europe then, Jacqueline and Victor, again, similar to maybe Brooke and Jason, coming off two very different seasons. Last year, Jacqueline obviously had disappointment. Now she's back. That was the aim, and it's been achieved. And then Victor, huge potential, missed out last year. You could argue for the betterment of his long-term career, missed out last year. He seems to have come on leaps and bounds in the last 12 months. Are you happy with both of those and high expectations now in August?
I don't know if I'd put high expectations on them in terms of getting a result, but just high expectations on them in terms of keeping themselves to a standard in training, which I know they'll do. Yeah, they kind of both had the similar season last season in terms of they both missed out, but both coming from opposite ends of their career, really. Victor just coming into the start of his career, and Jackie's already had a solid career behind her. So for Jackie, it was very much on her side. It was our approach that we had with her training was purposely different to what she had previously done. So that we could get into a bit of a different, just bring up her weaknesses just that little bit to stop that that performance which drops her out, which we know in these really competitive regions, one or two of them, and it's really tough unless you get an event wins to scrape it back. And it turned out that Jackie was just like really consistent across all of the events, never really like shone above everyone, but never really had like a bad event which dropped her way down the pack. So just a really consistent performance from her, which she's just going to hope to carry that going now through to games. And yeah, with Victor, it's obviously going to be his first games season, his approach to the games. And I'm very mindful of just making sure that we're not just suddenly like doing loads of crazy new stuff to expose him to all potentially new crazy like games events, and just trying to keep things similar. Okay, what we've done from since Rogue until now has worked really well, and not trying to put any new stresses on him, and just keeping him as much in his own training environment as possible. He's just done a camp, and he's got a little one with Claudia next week. But just get him on top of his routine, and we know that if we do that, we have a good 6 weeks. Is arriving in America in good condition.
Yeah, he had a brief appearance on Kill Taylor the other day as well. I thought he was going to give it a go himself, but he passed the baton.
He did the Europeans proud.